Welcome, everybody, to Starting a Business, Let's Make a Plan webinar. As Carolyn has mentioned, I am Brent Hoover. I run the Aiken area SBDC here, in addition to teaching at USC Aiken for the School of Business. Now, this is a joint webinar between the SBDC and the Pacer Center. Naturally, we are housed on USC Aiken, so the synergy is, of course, to be expected. So this is one of the first webinars that we're going to do in conjunction with the two centers. So what's our agenda for today? Well, if we scroll onto here, we can see as such. Naturally, with all of our webinars, we have to give you a little spiel about who we are and what we do. We are also offering the same courtesy to Dr. Sanila Portia, who is representing the Pacer Center as well. And then we will get into the webinar itself. Now, of course, it's all about the business plan. Everyone here is probably in the pre-venture or nascent stage. And therefore, you're looking to see how you might build out your plan. We're going to go through each individual component, approaching it from several different angles because naturally, you may be looking for a loan, you may be doing this just for yourself, etc. Now, of course, if you followed any of my past webinars, you know I love talking about cash flow. Granted, this is not a cash flow webinar, but we are going to show the tie-ins, of course, with the written narrative and how it functions around your cash flow forecast or your pro forma and what you might actually do to leverage with lenders. And last but not least, we will review. Now, I please ask you to wait on the questions to be answered until the end. So you can go ahead and type them into the Zoom chat box. My intern, Andrew Holmes, will be checking them periodically throughout, and we'll make sure that every question is indeed answered. But we do want to be respectful of everybody's time, stay within this hour range, and therefore we will answer the questions at the end. So with that said, in our case, actually, I apologize. I had this slightly out of order. Dr. Portia, I'm actually going to talk about the Pacer Center real quick, and then I will talk about the SBDC. My apologies on that. Dr. Portia, I'll give you a few
minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Brent has been generous with his time, energy, and knowledge to share this webinar with the USC Aiken School of Business Pacer Center. Pacer Center for Business Entrepreneurship and Business Research Entrepreneurship was established on March 18th this year. We are a fairly young entity of the university, but we do aspire to be recognized authority and leader in economic development, business research, and entrepreneurship in the CSR area. So when you think about University of South Carolina, Aiken, we do want you to think about all of your business needs. Then, of course, we have our Small Business Development Center and the Pacer Center for Business Research and Entrepreneurship Center to work together. We have lots of human capital. Our students are fabulous, and we are hoping to provide lots of consulting and research opportunities for all of you. For the next slide that Brent has for me, you're going to see the mission of the Pacer Center. We are hoping to provide data-driven, unbiased, rigorous research that will enhance our society. School of Business is internationally accredited, and one of our goals is to make positive societal impact. With that being said, we are hoping that we are going to positively impact idea development and share our business expertise and knowledge with our community. Our students, again, are great resources, but our faculty from all over all disciplines within the USC Aiken are our resource as well. So please get in touch with us, get in touch with Brent, and let us know how we can assist you with your small business needs. Brent, thank you so much for this introduction time, and I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation next.
Thank you, Dr. Portia. I appreciate it.
Always.
So as you heard, right, we're naturally in partnership, of course, with USC Aiken. We are housed here. So what does the SBDC actually do? Now, for some of you who are already clients, of course, you're probably well familiar. For those that are not, I figure I'd give it a quick rundown. So in essence, we are funded through the government, both federal, state, and even locally here through Aiken County. We're able to offer completely confidential and no-cost counseling services. That's critical. Now, because of that no cost, people always wonder, well, what's the catch? We do expect clients to be able to track metrics of how we can improve their company, whether that's starting a business, as we were talking about today, or growing the business through sales, new employees, capital formation, etc. None of that's ever released individually, but we do aggregate them in the respective categories. We also, too, have access to the resources. Now, what it actually is entailing in those resources, well, it could be IBIS World, which we're going to talk about briefly. One, a great market research. We've got Vertical IQ, we've got Profit Sense. We do coordination, of course, through QuickBooks. Some of us, including myself, are certified as pro advisors in that case. So we have a wealth of opportunities that we can offer in terms of knowledge that you can take advantage of. Now, clearly we're on a webinar today, so therefore it's hitting the third point, the education and training workshops. Yes, we are always asking clients to be on our mailing list, because if you are on the email mailing list, you can keep up to date on what we're willing to offer from our webinars throughout the calendar year. And last but not least, you see, Aaron, here is the Cybersecurity Program Initiative. This is a new thing that we've debuted recently, probably since the start of the pandemic, give or take. Actually, with our cyber team, myself included is on said team. Earl Gregorich is actually the head of it. He is indeed our guru of all things cyber. Mainly, we're focusing on the elements of basic cyber hygiene from level 1. There's a new model coming down through DoD, the CMMC. It's a 2.0 model, and we're helping businesses with the first 17 action steps. Doesn't require rocket science from a cybersecurity degree, but it is knowledgeable, and therefore it is applicable to any small business and keeps you from being a soft target. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. There's no additional cost for what we offer on these categories. Now, with that said, let's actually talk about the business plan, shall we? I always like to preface any discussion on the business plan with a picture of a map, because essentially your business plan is indeed the roadmap for your business. Now, one of the things I'm hoping that you've actually come to hear before you started your legal structure. If so, you're doing this on the right track. And if not, no worries. There's ways to get back on the right destination. So the whole thing behind the map is naturally part of your destination may end up changing. That's perfectly fine. The business plan is a living document. Okay. If it's remaining stagnant, that's probably not a good thing. But in this scenario, we want to ensure that we're always moving forward with the company. Now, one of the things I also like to include in this discussion is being in the business and versus on the business. Most companies, when they start out, they get so enamored with actually ensuring the company is up to speed, dealing with customers, social media, etc. They get bogged down in the weeds. But in essence, business planning is taking back a step beyond the business approach, thinking about it strategically. When COVID happened, it really offered a beautiful opportunity for us as businesses to actually examine what are we doing well and what are we doing wrong. So unfortunately, out of that bad externality, at least something positive came out of it. And I think it allowed companies to consider that approach wholeheartedly, more so than they had prior to the pandemic. Now, the plan is really going to look at who will be reading. Okay. If you are needing this for a bank loan, the whole idea is to treat this almost as a risk mitigation plan. Essentially, when I am dealing with my clients and talking to these lenders, we want to make the plan tailored around their exact specifications. If they don't need it, we don't have it in the plan necessarily. They're the one that we're going to prepare for the lenders. Okay. I mentioned risk mitigation. I want to know the lender's concerns starting off. Those are going to be our primary areas of focus within said plan. But you're not always necessarily going to a lender. Perhaps you're actually trying to get an investor on board. Perhaps you're looking at setting up a corporation. Therefore, maybe you're even needing an angel investor. In those scenarios, right, the business plan still functions the same way. It's talking about what you're going to do and how you were going to get there. The logistics involved with that and making sure the numbers actually add up. Now, I'd like to throw out the third point. It's not always well known, but the government contracting perspective. Because in essence, let's say you become a contractor, you're working on a request for proposal. In essence, you are building a business plan. Now, let me also throw a disclaimer on that. If you are working with, say, an RFP, you want to ensure that the information is exactly what they want and nothing else beyond that, because that actually could hurt your chances on those cases. But it's still important if you're going to the B2G route, the business to government route. And of course, let's not forget about ourselves. I mean, if we are preparing this at our own benefit, we're hurting the situation. In essence, I see so many companies say, well, I'm not getting a loan, I'm not getting an investor. Why do I need to bother with one? Well, you've been amazed that when you actually take some time to write these down on paper, you can start to figure out, well, what's working and what's not, and what may not actually be feasible. Okay. And the fifth point on here is something I always see neglected in a way. So many times we're always preparing it for someone who's going to fund it or for ourselves, but keeping your employees knowledgeable about what you're doing. Now, of course, you may not want to share all the intricacies that come along with your business plan with said employees. But in essence, they need to understand this is a roadmap. they're the ones that are going to get you to your ultimate destination. Therefore, it's good to keep them knowledgeable about the journey that they're about to embark upon. But I do always want this in the back of your mind. You're going to be approaching this in multiple angles because we got so many people on this call. You also need to acknowledge the fact who is going to end up reading this, and therefore making sure we're touching all of the areas that are necessary for those parties. All right, so if a business plan in essence could be called a feasibility plan, given all my work with clients, I've kind of broken it down into 4 categories. And I'm going to go into the individual components that you see in most business plan templates. But in essence, they're working around these 4 quadrants. Your product or service mix. Clearly, if you don't have something to sell, why are you in business? I mean, you won't be for very long in that matter. Okay. Now, financials are in the green. In essence, I think this is hilarious because normally I write the plan around the pro forma because I've always felt if the numbers don't add up, well, the narrative is a bit superfluous. However, in this case, right, we're focusing on the narrative today. But still, the financials have to be the core, the skeleton behind this. Because once again, if we can't get the numbers to operate as needed, this may not indeed be feasible. Now, the third quadrant you see here is with human capital. You cannot do this entirely by yourself, okay? Somewhere down the road, you are going to have some activity, whether primary or support, that gets outsourced, okay? And if you are doing as much as possible, it kind of ties back to the first point that I made. The business plan is approaching from a risk mitigation. We need to consider all contingencies that may occur in that process. This is not just your W-2 employees. These could be your 1099 contractors. They could be subcontractors. They indeed include yourself and or if you have, for some reason, any volunteers working with you. And last but not least, the promotion, the marketing element. Now, in this case, right, we're going to tie in, of course, what goes on with the strategy. We need to set some groundwork before we actually get to that point. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a product and we don't know actually how to sell it, getting it to a customer or client, we are not going to last long in this world of business. So the 4 quadrants, right? I'm going to talk about the individual components you see, but in essence, they are built around or revolve around these elements. All right, so we need to get some data first off. One of the things I really encourage that you see on the right side of the screen is the NAICS. That's the NAICS code. It stands for North America Industry Classification System. Essentially, you'll end up with a 6-digit code. Technically, it starts at 2-digit for the sector and works its way all the way down to 6. The reason I bring this up is business plans will have to incorporate research of some component. Now, we could actually divide those into 2 tiers, the primary research and the secondary research. What we're going to talk about on this slide is mainly secondary research. It's already been prepared for you. You may or may not have to pay for it, depending on where you're turning. In the case of IBizWorld, if you become a client of the SBDC, we actually have a subscription into it. Therefore, you're not paying, say, $1,000 or more for the information that you need. The reason I bring up the NAICS is this. If we are working with secondary data, secondary research, we need to know the NAICS because most of it revolves around said code. Now, you can have more than one code. You may sell more than one thing. That's perfectly fine. But I would like to identify what is going to be your primary component of the product or service mix. In that sense, that would become your primary NAICS code. If you ever want to look this code up, you can just go to NAICS.com, or you can also go to the census. And if you're a client of ours, we can find it, well, for the most part, rather quickly. Some codes can actually be more trial and error because you'll find that they'll cluster certain industries together under one code, and maybe you're just a subset of that. That's the nice thing about IBizWorld is that we can actually sometimes pull specialized reports that are tailored to just your industry and your industry alone. They go deeper than just the NAICS code in that element. But why do we want to pull the IBizWorld for our business plan, right? Because that's the discussion for today. Well, because we like to see what's going on with the macro statistics. If I'm preparing this for a lender, or shoot, even just for ourselves, I want to know what the growth rate is 5 years past. I want to know what the expected growth rate is 5 years future. I want to know how many establishments exist within my state, what area of the life cycle, of the product life cycle that is, where are we falling under that? Is it in the maturity? Is it in decline? Or is it just starting, etc.? All these tools we can find within the IBizWorld report. More importantly, and this ties into the second element here, Profit Sense. That is a separate company out there, but it is an amazing financial tool. It allows us to benchmark where your business should be as a percentage of sales. So everything that you focus on, whether that's advertising, cost of goods sold, et cetera. The IBIS World Reports also feature a component of that. That gives the client, or in this case, you, a sense of where everything should be in relation to your total sales. That way, when we're getting into the business plan, we can talk about, okay, if you deviate from the mean, why is that? Sometimes it's perfectly fine. Other times it may be concerning. And last but not least, there are more local tools, such as Esri in that sense. Ben Calhoun, who's part of our SBDC network, I generally turn to him because he has access to this information. This is where we can get extremely granular, really boiling down to the local level. Now, these are not just the only resources available. Since we have a partnership, here with the USCA Aiken School of Business through our library, if I'm not mistaken, we still have access to the Barnes reports. So a lot of times when our students are looking for that, they can do state-by-state comparison. The nice thing is IBIS World has now started to incorporate state-by-state comparison into the majority of their reports, right? This is all secondary research. And if you're, say, working with us, it's probably not going to cost you anything out of there. But it's not tailored to you. And just like I said, you had to tailor the business plan, you do have to sometimes tailor the market research. And that's where it goes into the second tier. That's the primary research. People tend to neglect that, but however, it certainly holds its merit nonetheless. This actually requires you looking at your competitors. We're going to talk about them in relation to the competitive matrix, but also trying to understand, why are people going to buy this product or this service? What are they really seeking in terms of value from this similar type of industry that you are going to enter into? Therefore, we're able to pull not just macro statistics, but some of it's going to take some legwork on the micro. And that may literally be you going into a competitor's shop, checking out what the store layout's like, what's going on with the customer service, the atmosphere. All of these factor in because you're trying to come up with your competitive edge. But for the most part, right, if we want to start simple, let's identify the next code or codes and see what the macro market statistics are showing for our type of business. Now, speaking of the market strategy, you may have seen this in business textbooks before. You always maybe hear a push versus pull. A lot of businesses go for the push route. They're saying, here's my product. I'm trying to find a customer or hopefully several lines of customers in order to purchase the product. If you are an existing industry, say in that life cycle, the IBIS World Report says, you're a maturity, you're probably going to see that you're more along the lines of push. However, pull's interesting. That's when you are actually saying, what do the customers need? And let us build a demand schedule. And this is something I highly encourage every business plan to incorporate, some form of a demand schedule, where it shows, all right, you say you're going to have these customers, right? But who do they end up actually being? Anytime we deal with a client that is in a first mover situation or second mover, somewhere in that initial status of the industry's life cycle, we tend to have to do this because the lender's not extremely knowledgeable about what this product or service can offer. Therefore, they're a little more hesitant to give out funds. So in the business plan, we incorporate a demand schedule. And that's literally almost like a tabular format, where these are the people or the companies that are going to be our customers or clients. This is what they're willing to pay. This is what they need. And this is how often they need it. Essentially, we're going to create an aggregate quasi accounts receivable. That's going to make the bank feel better. Same thing if you were looking for an investor. Okay. It's going to reassure them that it's not just hypothetical. We've actually got some people interested in buying the product and that's willing to put it in writing. Okay. But I do want you to consider how you are going to approach with this strategy. I'm not talking about marketing here. This is more just looking at the market as a whole. And part of that, once again, is going to depend whether we're in the infancy of your industry or perhaps we're more on the decline. But push or pull, consider it nonetheless when you're dealing with your business plan. All right. So what are those typical components you see within plans? Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, where do you start? Do you start from scratch? In all honesty, you can find a plethora of templates out there online. We have our own template as well. You will find one on bplans.com. You'll find one for marketing plans on M-Plans. LivePlan is a great software out there as well. Part of our areas and SBDCs have been using it to great success, with lenders in those capacities. Whatever template that you choose, remember this, it is a template. I make my students do this for their business courses in entrepreneurship. And I say you can't just plug in, fill in the gaps on a template because it's not tailored towards you. Okay. But if I had to take a consensus among all our sample size of businesses that we help, we probably see the following elements. Well, we got the executive summary up top. We have the company profile and the UVP. We got the industry analysis, human capital. I've already mentioned the scope of services and the product mix, the marketing plan, the financials, and sustainability. So let's talk about each one. I don't have a separate slide on all these. I figured it'd be easier just to discuss these individual elements, right? Now, the executive summary may show up on the start of any business plan. Usually this is a one-page scenario that summarizes everything going on within said plan. There's an age-old debate. Do you write the executive summary last or do you write it first? I'm always, and this is just my own personal opinion, I actually encourage clients to write a draft of it to begin with, and then go through all your research and then finalize it again at the end. But in essence, you're trying to just give a sense about the highlights of this business. If we're doing this for a loan, I want to get straight to the point about the risks the banks feel that they are going to incur by giving you these funds. So it's addressing the problems right out of the start. But in essence, it's going to show who you are when you started, what are you selling, and then how we're going to finance that. Like I said, if we were doing this for a loan, we'd literally have it probably in bold. Hey, this company is seeking $50,000 via microloan. Gets straight to the point, but then addresses the issues at hand. Usually we'll take bits and pieces of the market research as well. They'll say like, hey, the growth rate was 5 years for the past 5 years, but we're expecting the 5% to grow to 7% over the next 5 years. We could talk about the number of establishments. We'll also touch in points of value about you specifically as a company, right? But I encourage companies usually to keep this to one page. It's sort of similar to the resume, right? Because the rest of it's just kind of giving them a teaser about everything that's going to be included in here and addressing all the issues that, well, need addressing. Now, the second individual component you see here is the company profile / UVP. No, the UVP has its own slide, multiple slides in here. So I'm only going to touch on the highlights here. But with the company profile, I want to show that this company has done its due diligence, right? That if you're an LLC, that here's your date of incorporation. We show we're in good standing with the Secretary of State. We have an EIN number. We have a DUNS number. For a government contractor, we got a cage code. All of these issues show who's in the company, when it was formed. If we got multiple people, we'll give the percentage of ownership. And we'll start to break down into the bios of each of those key personnels. I mean, imagine if it's just you. Well, if you're preparing this for a bank, they want to see that you have plenty of industry experience. Perhaps you got 10 plus, maybe you got 15. Let's say you're a novice in that case, and you don't. They understand that you were quite knowledgeable as a human being, but you personally just do not have that experience. Therefore, they're going to want to turn to other individuals who perhaps you will hire or outsource that possess such experience. That's where you can talk about individuals as well through that. Now you might say, well, can we incorporate the human capital portion? Yes, you certainly can. Believe me, there is no official rule here, right? It's going to be representation of who you are as a company, but you will see on most of the cases, that's what typically falls under the company profile. We're going to come back to the UVP or / the USP, depending on which version that you want to incorporate. But the company profile is simply that. It's detailing the due diligence. And there's other points of due diligence your company may face. Are you required to collect sales tax? Show them that you've got your DOR license, your 111. Perhaps you're under the jurisdiction of the DHEC in South Carolina. Therefore, showing those scenarios. The LLR, labor licensing and regulation. The list goes on. But once again, even if you're just doing it for yourself, you're like, well, I already know that. But it's just making sure that you have all the pieces in place. It's amazing what happens when we write down things. We tend to realize we've forgotten a few others, and it keeps us in check. Now, with the industry analysis, we pretty much were talking about that on the prior slide. The primary research, the secondary research, right? Showing all the NAICS codes that are applicable. Now, sometimes you will deal with a different type of code that needs to be incorporated in your business. And that is what's known as the SIC, or the SIC code, Standard Industrial Classification. That typically is a 4-digit code. And in this case, it's right. NAICS stands for North America. So if you're looking for research abroad, outside of North America, you're probably going to have to deal with SIC. If you end up getting something like a DUNS number through Dun & Bradstreet, they still deal with the SIC code. So the nice thing is if you go through something like NAICS.com, it'll show you the matching SIC code to your NAICS code that you are seeking. Okay. So once again, I just figured I'd throw that out there. But a lot of this is just going into how you're taking the secondary research and applying it to your individual company. Okay. And part of that also looks at the competition, making sure you have a strong competitive matrix and you can see what's important to the customer. And I cannot stress that enough. Whether you're doing a SWOT analysis, 5 forces, looking at the industry as a whole, keep this in the back of your mind. If it does not matter to your customers, it is actually irrelevant on this conversation. Now, maybe you can convince them otherwise, but for a lot of times, you really do need to consider that in your analysis. Okay. Just because it's important to you, that's great. But at the end of the day, they're the ones giving you money for your product or service. So that always has to be the underlying thought in this discussion. Now, with the human capital, right? So we can turn to the people that are not necessarily the owners or members of the company. And we can look at those of the labor, W-2, 1099, subcontracting. So you may say, well, I don't know who those individual people are yet. Well, you need to know what they're going to do. One of the best tools I actually encourage people to go through is payscale.com. And if you Google payscale.com and you put in, say, what you're looking for in terms of the job title, this really makes sure you actually got the job title and the job description. And I mean, essentially, those are the 2 key elements that you're going to need for a job application that you're going to post publicly. And part of that's you're wondering, like, well, what is this job actually called officially? Similar to the NAICS code. It certainly helps to have that official classification. Why? Because PayScale will make it a little easier to see what the going market rate is. But look at other job applications out there on the market. You can see what falls under the description, right? And in those cases, I encourage businesses when they are planning this to also include everything that the type of employee or contractor may need to do, particularly with the W-2 employees. Because I don't know about your individual scenarios, but I have seen job applications out there that are a tad vague. And then the employee goes into that as a small business. And then they realize they're encouraged to do literally anything and everything that's needed. No, it helps to find the best people possible when doing a business plan is to follow this logic, ensuring that the steps in the job description are actually indicative of their day-to-day operations. You're going to be amazed at how you find better qualified people, and they will be more understanding about what you can offer them, and therefore it makes the process mutually beneficial. But of course, we do want to tie into the numbers too. I mean, I mentioned the going market rates, right? You know, what are you looking for in terms of the education, years of experience? And perhaps, like I mentioned earlier, you are considered to be a quote unquote novice to your industry. Therefore, you need to find people that have that strong experience. And this is where you're looking at it, right? And now some people may say, well, I'm not planning to bring on an employee on day one. I'm going to wait 6 months. I'm going to wait a year. That's perfectly fine. In those scenarios, you can talk about in sustainability, but also show here, well, it's not going to be an immediate element. We are going to be looking at, say, 6 months from now, a year, etc. But that is the human capital component. Remember, you can tailor this as needed. Then we bring ourselves to the core of our company, what we're selling, or is whether that's tangible or intangible. Now with the product mix, if you are selling indeed tangible products, I encourage you to essentially approach it from the catalog perspective. Here's everything we're selling. Here's where we're getting these raw materials from, because sometimes you may actually be shaping them into the final product. Sometimes you're reselling them directly, straight inventory. But you got the product, you got indeed what it's costing you, you got your sales price, and then you're showing that how it relates to the competition sale price. More importantly, what is the value being brought? Now, if you're ever curious, there's a nice model out there that can be adapted to either one of these scenarios, and that's called the stage gate model. And a lot of times I'll actually have clients pull bits and pieces of that into their business plan. And essentially it functions the same way: initial investigation, detailed investigation, applying this market research to you exactly, and then gets into, well, how are we going to showcase this value to the customer? Now, if you've got a service, right, you have something intangible, you may not have a cost of goods sold at all related into that. That's perfectly fine. List them out. And then you can kind of rank yourself, especially from the service angle, of what you're essentially willing to do with this company. Because sometimes, similar to NAICS codes, people are like, yeah, well, hypothetically, I could do that. Well, A, does the customer really want that? And B, are you actually willing to do that routinely? All right. In those scenarios, you need to consider both. All right. But in essence, it's going to have a very tabular format here, whether it is tangible product or indeed a service that is intangible. But you are detailing out everything that's going to go along with it. And of course, once you figured out what you're going to sell, it's all about how you were going to sell it. You know, I know it may sound redundant, but if you've ever been in a marketing class, they tell you about the 4 Ps: the price, the place, the promotion, in those cases, right? And of course, your product is the obvious P. You really need to make sure you can answer all 4 of those. Students laugh at me on day one when I tell people that. And sometimes clients do if they're familiar with the 4 Ps, but I'm saying those are indeed the bedrock for any form of marketing. And if you can't do that, you've already got a problem to begin with. And the business plan gives you a chance to correct that. Now, I've got an additional slide about how to approach some of the elements of the marketing plan. I always want businesses to remember this in the back of their mind. When it comes to marketing, tactics are one thing. At the end of the day, it's about helping somebody's life out, whether that's through a want or a need, solving a problem. Your product or service is a solution to those scenarios. It's from one human being to another. And a lot of times I think that gets lost in the translation, especially in social media. But in essence, that's never going to change regardless of the outlet that exists. You know, right now, you know, it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. All those will change, but the core foundation will not for the marketing analysis. And of course, I talked about the financials. So that's going to tie into our pro forma. And yes, I do have a slide on that, of course. The numbers need to be the foundation for this business plan. And I encourage clients, whether they are an Excel guru or not, to go get applicable quotes. Go get 3 of them each time. Identify who you talk to on those cases, the source, the logic behind it. You know, if you stay for one of our upcoming webinars on cash flow and credit and or just getting business loans, I typically encourage the use of comments within Excel. It allows underwriters to really understand the logic, but also too, if you're putting comments on there to help you remember it, a lot of times you can translate those comments into the written portion of the business plan within this case. Now, sustainability can be interesting. When you're going for some loans, certain lenders don't even actually want this included. They just want it focused in. You know, it's very narrow niche about what you're seeking right now. However, I'd like to think that you are indeed considering the future. If your business remains stagnant for too long, it's going to be the metaphorical death of said business. The way I approach my sustainability is this. I consider it to be reactive for the first part. Now, that's just the most basic element. I like to consider this contingencies and also to strategic planning. So with the contingency elements, I am lining up, because I mentioned this could be treated as a risk mitigation analysis. But if you're a single person, you're a single operator company, what happens, God forbid, something occurs to you, end up in the hospital for an extended duration. What happens to the business? Do you have key person insurance? Do you have somebody else who can actually act as your proxy? Okay. And that's one thing to be considered is, are you going to be approaching your company from in the business versus on the business? I have some people that want to be extremely hands-off. I'm like, that's perfectly fine. But you need to have a strong proxy, someone who can be you when you are not there. You trust them, their knowledge is definitely sound, and those that work with them respect them and they're able to get the job done. But sustainability. So maybe we do a 1-year plan. Maybe we do 2 years, maybe we do 5 years. I've seen go out to 10 years, but in all honesty, I mean, as you can see, the current world we live in, we don't know what it's going to be like a decade from now. Usually I encourage clients to just focus on the sustainability efforts about 1 to 5 years. You can't show me how the business is going to change and or evolve in the next 12 months, 24 months, 36. Beyond, of course, you have to take things with a grain of salt. That's why I mentioned the business plan is indeed a living document. Now, these, once again, are just standard elements that I see in most templates. You feel free to adjust as needed. Sometimes you'll find templates don't apply to you. You got to add things in. And then sometimes you're like, this is indeed 100% superfluous. You can go find something else. Remember, at the end of the day, theoretically, you could write a one-page business plan. I know our sister organization SCORE loves to do that. And I understand completely the logic of it. It's trying to get basically boiled down to the most simple elements. What are you selling? Who's going to be selling it? How are we going to keep adding value to the customer? All right. Now, if you asked about what's the typical length of a business plan, if you're ever worried you have superfluous information in the narrative, there's this great thing called the appendix. Use it to your advantage, especially with the lender. Believe me, they don't want to read a 30-page business plan, and I don't think you want to either. The appendix allows you to have a large page length, but it's not included in the main narrative. It's not disrupting the flow of the information that you're trying to process. On average, most of my clients usually go somewhere about that 8 to 12 pages. And then if we need to have more, we use the appendix for that. Now, I mentioned the competitive matrix analysis, right? So in those cases, I talked about you looking at those companies that would be considered a threat. Now, sometimes your competitor could indeed be your supporter. You could actually strategically partner with them. But I told you to focus on things that actually matter to the customer. And that's what would be falling under attribute 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're sizing yourself up. Essentially, this is like an ESPN statistical breakdown between two teams. What do they do well? What are they poor on, right? But they're focused on those attributes. In the world of sports, maybe that's how many yards you get, points scored, points allowed. Here, you're looking to see the commonalities, those things that customers deem worthy of giving their finances to. And in that case, right, so you would start off yourself, but then rank you all the way down. So what we're looking to do is capitalize on those check marks, the things we do well, and then hopefully minimize or completely negate those areas where we are indeed having fallings. And sometimes, unfortunately, with weakness, you can't mitigate it entirely. Sometimes hit the proverbial brick wall, for lack of a better term. That's okay. But you want to actually minimize the risk involved in each of these scenarios. Sometimes I don't see that often enough with competitive matrix, but I think it is so crucial, especially if you're going to need this for investors. Anytime we're working, say, through the South Carolina Department of Commerce, like with Chuck Bundy, you'll see in a lot of those templates, they indeed have a focus with competitive matrix. So once again, it certainly holds its value. Now, what do you end up doing with that matrix? This allows us to actually tie back to the point ahead about the UVP/USP. You'll hear it called unique value proposition, unique selling proposition. It's interchangeable in terms of the wording. However, it comes down to value. Now, here's the thing. I've got two things here essentially acting as satellites on this graph, the corporate and the street. I tell people to start with the corporate. This is what I came up with from a management style. It asks, what are you selling? Why do they need this product? And are you going for relative cost or relative price strategy? And I always encourage companies to consider that second option because, yeah, you know who you're probably going to end up selling your product to or your service to. But it's not asking, in that case, just how often they need it. It's why they need it. It's boiling down to the root, going another why down. And that's something when you do a business plan, I strongly encourage this. When you make a statement, give something to back that statement up. So many times I'll see like somebody keeps some just wording that sounds great. But I'm like, once again, how do you actually turn that into an action item? It's giving the logistics involved, seeing how that becomes a reality. So you got those three things on the corporate side, right? What are you selling? Why do they actually need it? And are you going more towards the cost or the premium pricing? That allows you to get around to the second element, and that's the street UVP. Okay, the reason I call it the street UVP is because imagine if you were on the streets of New York, say Times Square. You turn to a random stranger, you got 60 seconds to convince them. Essentially, when you always hear about the elevator pitch, it's kind of what's going on here. Okay, you don't want to throw out the buzzwords of synergy, some of the things in the back end. That's more your corporate UVP. But you're taking that and actually boiling it down to what matters to the customer, making it easily digestible. The easiest way to do it here, and I encourage clients to do it as well. Can you give me 3 to 5 bullet points of something that is indeed different than what your competitors are doing and the customer values it? Not in sentences, bullet points, 3 to 5. truly unique. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is. But I'm saying if you can get to 5 bullet points out of that, you've actually essentially started to craft your street EVP. Because at the end of the day, you're boiling it down to the simplest form possible with your customers. Now, of course, that can change. Your competitors are going to change what they offer, that you're going to evolve in that process. That's perfectly fine. But the whole reason I stress this so much is people go to marketing. Oh, I got to be on social media. My business plan's got this. We're going to be on Instagram. And I'm like, well, why are you actually on there? If you don't have your unique value proposition in place, you're essentially throwing darts up against the wall with the rest of us, say, on social media. I encourage businesses with their business plan to look at everything that they're going to do from a marketing standpoint. Does it revolve around this value proposition? Because if it doesn't, I feel it's not going to be as sustainable as it could be otherwise. Yeah, you might get lucky and succeed with it. That's okay. But you could do a lot better if you use this as the foundation. It's not trying to be rocket science, but I think it is a crucial component of the business plan nonetheless. Now, one of those things I always like to throw in marketing, I don't know if some of you know this, Bill Walsh used to be an NFL coach, very successful, and he was famous for scripting plays. Sometimes he would script 15, 20 plus plays. No matter what happened on the field, he was sticking to that logic. I encourage a similar approach here when you're starting out in a company. I like to think of it from a 30-day perspective. So in marketing, right, we got our value proposition. I figured out which outlets I'm going to use. I know my specific mission to using this marketing outlet. But now what are you actually going to do for the game plan, the day-to-day aspects of the marketing? And so many people are like, well, I'll just post on social media here when I get some time. You'll find your time may not be as large in duration as you thought otherwise, especially when starting the company. Things can get overwhelming. Give yourself a buffer zone. You ever taken one of my webinars on cash flow and credit? I talk about a debt service coverage ratio. It gives you about a month's buffer from the bank's perspective. Similar approach here with the marketing. Go ahead and game plan out. What are you going to do for those first 30 days of your marketing efforts for promotion? That doesn't mean things can't evolve. I once again stress it is a living document. But you'll find that you have more time to actually focus on the strategic nature of the company. You won't be overwhelmed, and it gives you a nice edge going into this. And once again, on paper, you can see what works and maybe not necessarily what you thought might, but it unfortunately does not. So once again, it's something to consider food for thought. Now, I mentioned, of course, the written plan's got its tie into the pro forma, which is just a fancy way of saying we got an Excel cash flow forecast. Now, if you are using live plan software, this will actually be built in to your written plan. Otherwise, you'll have 2 separate documents usually. You'll have your Word document, you got your Excel. Now, for Excel, of course, I encourage people to go 36 months, 3 years out. But once again, I stress that you can't have the business plan exist in a vacuum of its own. Okay, it is still directly correlated into this pro forma. Okay, yes, they can change, but 3 quotes, get the sources behind the quotes, and take a lot of those, what you're going to do in the comments of Excel, and bring them into the business plan itself. Right? You wanted to show the short-term analysis of the finances, but also the long-term. Okay, even if you are self-financing with your business plan, once again, it is going to be all your money. Therefore, I highly encourage you to be cognizant of the fact that things can happen. Contingency places are necessary, right? We find that out. Murphy's Law is considered to be a law rather than a theory of what can go wrong, will go wrong, informally speaking. And of course, we do want to leverage this potentially for the loan, right? So if you are needing to do this business plan for indeed a lender, a lot of times I approach that as like a game of fishing on a lake. I'm throwing out bait, I see what bites, and I have clients ask them directly, what are you concerned about within this industry? What do you need specifically to see within this business plan? And we look at that. But of course, you got your 5 C's here going on in terms of with lending, right? You got the capital, capacity, collateral, character, and conditions, the 5 C's of credit. Okay, making sure your FICO score is 680 or above. Ensuring that you can actually secure a loan if you go this route with a business plan, and needs to show that. And if you can't do it individually yourself, who's going to co-sign to fill in the gaps with that? Yes, they are evaluating, of course, the conditions, aka your industrial analysis, and you as an individual. Now, in terms of, some people argue, should you write first person versus third person? That's more of an issue for academia. All right. But they are judging that you are going to be the basis, the core of this company. The company is essentially an extension of you. Therefore, you better be an accurate representation of that, making sure it's positive out there. Some of the things business plans will actually focus on in the latter parts is indeed considering the community element. And that's more just so for those individuals, right? They're not doing it for necessarily a lender or an investor, but they're trying to see how they can be involved in the community. Maybe they're going to sponsor some things, but also too, what's going on with the mission. And I really cannot stress that enough. In the executive summary, the mission statement. You may hear about it. I think mission statements and business plans are like visual effects in movies. They're done right, nobody really notices, and it's happy for everyone involved. You do it wrong, everybody notices. And I will say this, in essence, that's trying to answer one thing. Why are you in business other than making money? Because I think that's what actually separates or differentiates a small business from an entrepreneur. Because it's got to go beyond the profit. Yes, profit is great. Please don't think otherwise. Otherwise, you're going to be probably better suited for a different field. But it goes beyond that because it's tying into continuously adding value. Talk to your customers, talk to your suppliers, talk to your employees, see how things can be improved. Like I said, spend at least every quarter on this business plan. It's not just something you put together at the beginning and say, all right, we'll throw it in the cabinet. No, let it grow. Therefore, your company can grow as well with that case. So that brings us to the end of our formal presentation. Naturally, I wanted to take some questions. I have posted my contact information here as well. One of the easiest ways to sign up as a client, go directly through that link. Choose Aiken as the center. Most of you here, you're probably trying to start the business, so you'll list not in business yet, or you'll be right on the startup phase, meaning less than 1 year. We'll get you signed in quickly. We'll do an initial 30-minute Zoom call and go from there. So in those scenarios, let's look at the chat and see what do we have for questions. It looks like actually we're pretty good on this case. So I'm happy to hear that. I mean, the great thing is about it is we're not just a one-time service. I mean, yes, this kind of gives you a teaser about what's available. But if you want to have access to some of these resources, our business plan templates, if you want me to go a deep dive into your business plan draft, no, I will not write the plan for you, but I'll be happy to hold your hand through the entire process, proverbially speaking. And in addition to that, right, side is where the profit sense. We can go as granular as needed to ensure that your company has the best chance of success moving forward. Okay, we did have one question come in. It looks like it's from Jason Stroh. For an LLC, what are the pros and cons of personally signing up as a registered agent? Oh gosh, I guess we could get into a whole other discussion on that case. Yeah, your company is going to talk about, the legal structure involved. Registered agent, I guess I would just kind of give some personal/professional opinions on that. Yeah, I actually encourage to list who is going to be the registered agent with the company, assuming you've actually already formed it. I mean, in essence, the registered agent is essentially acting as if the Secretary of State or anybody really on the government side needed to get in contact with the company, this is who they would do. Now, I will tell you this. The registered agent, if you search the Secretary of State's business directory through South Carolina, the company owner does not show up. All it lists is the company name. It shows when it was started, but it only then shows the registered agent and the registered agent address. It actually does not show the initial primary location for the company. So in that case, if you're looking to ensure that people always know that this is your company, especially as a startup, and they're a little hesitant about who you are, then in that case, maybe you're more inclined to be the registered agent. Technically they say the registered agent should be there, nearly all the time in order to act as said agent. So maybe if you're mobile, you're looking to get somebody else. I see people that are concerned about privacy. They'll actually have another company get it. If you end up using a virtual office here, say like Citizens Park Office and Conference Center or the Millon Park, they'll act as the registered agent for you. And then, like I mentioned, some people end up using attorney's office for those scenarios. It really kind of boils it down to how much do you want your personal name to be associated with the company, but also too, gets into the privacy angles. And that's something I think each individual is going to have to consider in those scenarios. But good question nonetheless. And yes, I would incorporate all those facets within the business plan.
So Brent,
Yes.
it says that Edward, oh, he just typed it in.
Okay,
there.
it's
So
great.
yeah, Edward Diaz, because he said he had a question, but I was waiting for him to type it.
Okay, to be able to get the benefits the SBDC offers, are all members of the LLC have to be American citizens. I'm an American citizen, my business partner is not. For the FC is 51%. Now, yeah, if we're talking, there's two different angles on that. Like if you're considered to be going through SBA, say for certification, yeah, they're going to want 51% to be in that case American citizen. Now, if you want our assistance in that case, unless my leadership says otherwise, yes, we'd be happy to help you out on those cases. That's not a problem. Really, what it boils down to for our assistance in Aiken is to ensure that you are actually registered in some form or are going to be registered with the state of South Carolina. Every state's got its own SBDC. And so imagine, like, I know we're right here on the border. And so if someone's over across in Georgia, but they're never going to do business in South Carolina, yeah, we're going to have to send them to the Georgia SBDC. But on this case, really the main thing that we just have to have you self-attest to is that you are classified as a small business. And for the most part, I can imagine you're going to fall under that. You'd be amazed at the SBA size tables on small business. They do it based on number of employees or revenue. So, and yes, feel free with anybody in this case. If they want to reach out to me directly, yes, you feel free to do so as an email. I mean, like I said, we're here to help for any for-profit business. If they're a small business, you're working in South Carolina. I can't give legal advice. I can't give tax advice. And I want to stress that enough. So many people turn to us and they think that we're going to be the quasi attorney or the quasi accountant. No, we're not. Okay, I do have to defer to those professionals for obvious reasons, but we're going to make sure that, you know, we're game planning around those issues and finding good resources in this case, because we actually do have the resource guide. SBDC overall in the statewide has a partnership pro bono with Turner Pageant through the Palmetto Propeller, and they'll work on a legal project for, if I'm not mistaken, it's $2,500 at market value, no cost to the client. And if for some reason that didn't work, yeah, we'll try our best to coordinate and get you in with applicable professionals. So yes, feel free to contact me directly. I'd be happy to help on that. And I think since that appears to be no other questions, I know Sanella wanted to plug our next webinar coming in. So I will move to the next slide. Sanella, would you like to talk about an upcoming webinar the Pacer Center is going to be doing?
Yes, sir. But first of all, I would like to thank you for this amazing presentation. It was very educational, and I hope our participants enjoyed also learning about what does it take to start a new business. If you are interested in learning about borrowing for your business and learning about the fundamentals of taking loans, please join us on February 15th, 2023, when Brent Hoover and again, Small Business Development Center and the USCA Pacer Center will provide another webinar for you. The link to that webinar is going to be provided to you next month, and I hope to see everybody there. Again, it was my pleasure to co-host this event with Small Business Development Center. And again, I want to thank you for your participation, for your attendance, and thank Brent for this wonderful webinar that we all enjoyed learning about.
Thank you,
Have a
Dr.
great day.
I appreciate it.